Every girl wants something a little special for her birthday. This year I fancied some perfume in pretty little bottles, but of course nothing is ever quite that simple around here. I've been making my own natural soap for over 10 years. I use natural deodorant and shampoo bars, and I don't wear conventional perfumes, so it was always going to turn into another Shire Meadow make. I've saved a handful of tiny perfume bottles from a thrift haul and thought it would be lovely to decorate each one in a different theme. Then invent a natural perfume to suit each bottle. I washed, then sterilised them all with alcohol. Because essential oils degrade in clear glass, I decided to tint the bottles by painting the outsides. I tested a mix of Mod Podge and food dye on a spare bottle and baked it at a low heat to cure. Once dry, it was almost impossible to scrape off, even with a craft knife. Perfect! I painted each bottle with different dyes until I had a nice mix of colours. The decorations needed to be durable too, as these bottles would be handled regularly, so I used some milliput epoxy I had left over from a previous repair. I also had a rummage through my stash of tiny treasures to see what might suit each design. The first bottle was small and round, with a pipette already attached, perfect for resting a tiny Gandalf hat on top. But what to use as the base? Then I remembered my last video, where I made a hobbit candle using a mould from Temu. I wondered if I could use the epoxy and some of the details from that mould on the bottle. I rolled and lightly oiled the putty, pressed it into the lettering from the mould, and it came out beautifully. Once trimmed down, it was just the right size. Pattern from the side of the mould covered the back, and details from a decorative mould finished the edges. I pressed in a tiny diamond at the back, just for a little sparkle. I covered the pipette to look like wood and painted everything in ordinary acrylic paints. finishing with a touch of gold for a bit of hobbit-worthy glamour. The hat went on top, and the bottle was complete. For the second bottle, I found a tiny toy sword and cut off part of the base. I planned to use a rock mould to texture the epoxy, but Millie Put is much stickier than my usual clays, so that idea didn't quite behave. Then I remembered a technique I'd used for the Snow Queen's crown, pressing a piece of amethyst into the surface to create texture. That worked beautifully. I wanted some of the green glass to show through, so I only covered part of the bottle, giving the illusion of stone. Painted in greys and greens. And inspired by a recent visit to Goodrich Castle, an 11th century medieval ruin, I added mossy tones and hints of lichen. Excalibur was weathered before adding 2 more diamonds, because even legendary swords deserve a little glamour. For the third bottle, I leaned fully into my love of nature, thinking back to my recent forest frame for my Tolkien stained glass window. I used moulds to create ferns and leaves that wrapped around the bottle. These were painted in layered greens, then finished with a Lego gem on the lid and a small silver charm on a chain to hang around the neck. With my love of trees, this bottle was inevitable. I used a technique from the bases of my faux Tiffany lamps to add bark texture around the base. Again, leaving gaps so the glass could still shine through. Tiny mushrooms, bought years ago from Amazon and finally given a purpose, were pressed into place, with epoxy moss underneath to hold them securely. Leaves were added to the lid to cascade down when attached, finished with a silver bead and another Lego gem. Everything was painted in acrylics, highlighted, then tinted with speed paints to add depth. The mosses and mushrooms were painted and finished with tiny dots on the caps. This bottle completely stumped me. Its shape was so unusual, I had no idea where to begin. In the end, I painted it orange, thinking I could make a fruity scent to match. Decorative edges were added around each rim using moulds with a couple of extra touches in the corners, and yes, 2 more diamonds. It was painted in brown and topped with gold, and and I have to say it turned out rather lovely. Perfect birthday glamour. For the perfumes, I'm using a carrier oil base with essential oils chosen to suit each bottle. So this year's birthday present to myself not only looks beautiful, but will keep my hair shiny and give me a different scent for every occasion. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.